Hey everybody, Lawrence here with 30 Basic Terrain, coming at you with another one. Continuing on with my Lair challenge build, this is part 2. I'm actually building the Lair itself. Now with this I kind of wanted to go with a little bit of modularity, so it wouldn't be strictly just for this the monster I'm going to be build for this. And so it could be a little bit generic, but dungeon tile, stairway, bunch of scatter terrain. Pretty simple in of itself, but I want to walk you through how I actually built this layer and show you all the different methods and materials that I used. But before we actually get to it, I want to give a big thank you and shout out to all my patrons, because your guys' help is greatly appreciated. Dungeon Matron, Corel, Mia Geek, and latest brand new patron, and I apologize if I butcher your name, SideQuest. So, as always, guys, your help is greatly appreciated, and I can't thank you enough. Alright, let's get to it. Now, the layer floor itself, I've actually traced a rough pattern on some 1-inch thick XPS, and I'm just going to treat this as like a giant tile. One single piece, and I'm not going to put too much detail work into the tile itself, because I want to be able to use this for more than just this monster layer. So, I'm going a little bit generic with it, just so I have more than one use for it. But as you can see, I'm just following along the lines of the shape that I drew, and using my Olfa knife here, cutting it out to the shape that I actually want. Now that I've got to cut the shape, I want to smooth off those hard edges around the outside of the tile. I'm just using some sandpaper, rounded it off a little bit, not that big a deal. And then I'm going to use that plastic grout brush, and I'm going to texture in some lines into the side there, just to give it some visual appeal. I mean, you can leave it smooth if you want, but like I said, the lines on the side, just to give it some visual appeal, and to sort of match the scatter terrain that I'll be doing later. Now, I just grabbed an offcut piece of 1-inch XPS I have, and I'm going to start working on the stairway path that goes down into the layer from the entrance. And as you can see, I want to make sure the stairs are actually wide enough, so I used the miniature to get the idea of how thick I want it to be, and basically cut some chunks of foam, getting ready to actually make this stairwell. Well, 1 inch is too thick for each individual stair step, so I'm just going to cut them all in half to roughly like ½ inch. So that'll actually be easier or smoother transition for stair steps. Now here I'm going to take some of those ½ inch pieces I cut down and actually start building the steps themselves. As you can see, I'm using a miniature to make sure each step has a place to go. I'll place the next step up, trace where it's going to go, and then I'll slap down some hot glue. I am going for a slight curve to this stairway, so as you can see, there is some excess sticking out, but that's only for now. Basically, lay it down, trace the pattern, put the hot glue where it's going to sit, and then just move on to the next step. Rinse and repeat, honestly. Now I'm just trimming away all the excess corner pieces that are sticking out, and then do some additional trimming, cut off some of the hard edges of the steps themselves, just to get us more smooth appearance, because I want to try and go for an almost natural appearance as far as the steps themselves go right now. So cut off, round out some edges, and just make it a more flowable, even look to it. At least that's what I was telling myself while I was doing this. Now I also have to fill up the empty space underneath the steps. So I'm taking a bunch of offcuts and scraps and just basically cutting it to fill up the end. Just so I'll have a solid base underneath the steps rather than trying to put like poles or a post or, even like a column underneath the steps to hold it up. I've got a bunch of scrap XPS, so I'm just going to basically fill a solid base up using all my scraps and offcuts. Now I'm using some sculptor mold here to smear on the sides, and basically I need to cover up all the layers of the foam and any cracks and crevices just to make it appear to be one solid piece. I'm also going to use it where each step meets each other because there is a seam there that I don't want to be seen, and just to, like I said, this is to make it seem like one solid piece. Pretty simple. Sculptor mold dries relatively quickly, and it gives a good natural texture to it. Now here I'm using some skeleton fingers that I had left over from the previous build, the Lair entrance. And I figured, well, I'm going to use these. And I figured these would make actually some creepy looking arches. So I'm just cutting up the fingers at an angle so they'll actually, where I want to place them will fit flat on the stairway itself on the sides. And they will make some cool looking arches. Pretty simple thing to do. Though these fingers are a bit hard plastic, so I'm using a razor saw to cut away because, like I said, it can be a bit of a pain in the butt. And I'm just, test fitting to make sure it actually fits how I want it. Now that I've got all the fingers cut to how I want, I'm still doing some test fits because that's a good idea to do. And now that I was like, okay. Now I'm just going to put on some hot glue and then stick them in place. Is this a perfect fit? No, it's not. But it actually, I will take care. It's not going to stick if I just leave it like this, but I will fix that later. And hey, it's later. Now I'm actually using some more sculptor mold, and I'm going to slab on the sides again. But also, I'm going to build up a layer of sculptor mold around the base of the fingers, or the finger arches. And that'll actually give it some more stability and allow the fingers to stay in place without really having to worry too much. Now I've cut this 3-inch thick foam that I have into various shapes, size blocks, couple inches difference between one and the other. But I want to actually slice it down into rounder shapes, so I'm just going to cut the corners off bit by bit until I get a roughly rounded shape for each size. There's a lot of blocks, so I'm going to be cutting a whole lot. I'm going to try and make some like scatter terrain, like natural like pillar shapes out of these. But again, I want to go for a rounded shape, so I have to cut all these sharp corners off. Now that I've got all my pieces roughly round shape, I'm going to start slicing them down into ½ inch to 1 inch to 1.5 inch thick pieces, because I actually want to build these up and give them an almost like stepped appearance going from the bottom to the top. At least that's what I was telling myself when I started this project. But no, these are going to wind up being scatter terrain, like pillars or columns, whatever you want to call them. But again, it's just a matter of slicing them down, and then I'll be able to stack them on top of each other for a unique look that I was going for scatter terrain for this Lair build. Now, I've already done a couple, you can see there off to the one side, but I'm just taking the various diameters and just hot gluing on top of each other so I get that step look I was going for. And you don't have to stack them in the exact same pattern time after time. You can go for different, put them all off to the one side or have them just stack up from the bottom in the middle. You can even get a really big one on the bottom, and then make multiple stacks. There's a lot of variety into what you can do with this. But again, it's just stacking. Now that I've got them all stacked, I want to actually get rid of these hard edges. I would have done it before I stacked them, but I wanted to do the stacking first just because I didn't want to limit myself to how I stack something. So for me, the better choice was to stack them, then actually cut all these hard edges off, just to make it a more rounded, natural appearance. Now, to give it a little more interest as far as visual-wise and texture, I'm going to run some beads of hot glue down the sides. And I actually am going to do this with the side of the stairway, too. I didn't see the need to show you the exact same thing twice, but just to give it a little more visual interest. So it's not just, hey, here's some stepped pillars. I wanted to give it a little something extra, just to break up the monotony of the same exact type of texture on one piece. Now, actually, when it takes my homemade texture paste, I'll put a link in the description how to make it, and just basically give all these pillars a coat of it. I'm actually going to be doing this to the sides of the stairwell as well, but again, it's the exact same method and technique, so I'm not going to show you the same thing twice. But again, I'm just putting on a nice little coat over everything, the foam, the hot glue, just basically everywhere that's going to be visible. And now that I've actually got the entire thing coated, I am going to take a really stiff bristle brush and just kind of paint dip it in some water, and then paint along the lines onto all the paste. This will give it a much more layered effect and just add to the overall visual interest. Now I actually want to add sand to the flat parts of the stairway. As you can see, I actually already added texture paste to it in the same manner I did with the scatter terrain. But this is just a matter of brushing on some watered down PVA and then pouring sand on top, then tapping it off. There are going to be spots that I missed, which is no big deal, and I'll just add some more glue and then sprinkle on some sand. It's a pretty simple idea.
Now, I am using watered down PVA, but if you want to try this, I would actually recommend using like regular PVA and brushing it in spots, because I know it'll give it some extra strength. I know what my players are going to do with this piece of terrain, and they know how I expect them to treat my terrain, but so I can use a weaker form if I want to, but I don't know how, like, say, your guys' players might do it. So if your players are really delicate with your stuff, go ahead and use the weak stuff. Otherwise, stick with full strength PVA. I'm using the same colors here as I did with my previous build, the Lair entrance. This is a mixture of some true ochre and a mid-tone brown on all stone areas, and I'm using this on the stairwells as well. I said, this is just a base coat. Go for as complete coverage as you can and do as best as you can. Now that the base coat is dry, I'm actually going for an overbrush, and this is just straight up true ochre with no brown in it. And this is going for like maybe 80-85% coverage or whatever. I'm leaving the deepest recesses alone. I said, this isn't a dry brush, this is an overbrush. It's not a heavy dry brush. It's an overbrush. It's a straight up overbrush, and I'm just leaving the deepest recesses alone. And here on all the stonework areas, including on the stairs, I'm going to be doing a quick dry brush on everything that's stone with, get this, a desert sand color. It's literally called desert sand. But it's basically a really light tan, almost off-white. Just a highlight. Now that I've gotten all that out of the way, I actually wanted to start painting all the sand areas, including on the big base tile, which is all covered with sand. So I'm just starting with the true ochre, because I want to go for a lighter appearance with the sand itself and then all the stone area. So everything that's sand is getting the true ochre for the base coat. And now that the base coat is done, I'm just going straight to the dry brush for this. It's quick and simple, it's easy, and I just wanted to have an overall lighter appearance than the stone itself, or the stonework areas. It's pretty simple and pretty easy. And I also did this with the base tile itself. I wanted to add a dark brown wash to everything, and including the pillars, I'm doing this too. But I'm using my homemade dark brown wash and just running it through my airbrush instead of brushing it on with a standard brush. You can do it with a regular brush. You don't have to have an airbrush, but I wanted to try this. And I was actually really happy with the way it turned out. So, boom, that's what I was going to do. And some of the areas I didn't think looked dark enough, so I just actually ran a second coat of the wash on, and it looked great. And I wound up doing this to all the pillars as well. Now that I got everything washed, I need to do a highlight dry brush just to bring out the edges and make it pop a little more. And I'm using that desert sand color, and then just going from the top down. Now that I got everything highlighted again, I want to bring in some shadows, and I'm using my homemade pigment powder and just getting in the cracks and crevices and adding some shadows and some dirt. Anywhere that it makes sense that dirt would collect or be a dark shadow or anything. Again, this is all for visual interest and to make your terrain pop. I said, you don't have to buy expensive pigment powders and stuff. You can buy the cheap stuff. I make my own. I'll put a link in the description. And afterwards, I just hit it with a quick mist of isopropyl alcohol, and it'll keep from rubbing off too easily. Now, for the finger arches, they've already been primered and then zenithal highlighted, so I'm just going to hit them up with a quick wash, some Agrax or shade from Citadel. And basically, it'll give it a more bone, like dirty, nasty bone appearance. I mean, if I really wanted to, I could just leave it as is, but eventually I am going to improve on how they look. But I'm just hitting all the finger arches with a wash, and then I'm going to set it aside and let it dry and work on some other stuff. Here I'm actually using a khaki color, and I'm going to basically do, honestly, a really heavy dry brush over top of all the bone areas, and leaving all the cracks and crevices alone. Just because I didn't want to leave it just as the dark brown wash that I put on, or the Agrax Earth shade, yeah. And this would just give it more of a bone appearance to all the different finger arches that I put up. It's pretty simple and pretty quick. This is a quick and dirty, nasty way of doing stuff, but it works. I've never had a problem with it, and I like the way it turned out. Now here I'm just using an antique parchment, which is a little bit light, like off-white color, just to give a real light dry brush to the tips and the edges, just to make it pop just a tiny bit more than what it did with the previous heavy dry brush that I did with the khaki. But I don't want them to look pretty because these are underground and they need to look dirty and nasty. So definitely not sun bleached. Now I've got these self-adhesive desert grass tufts, and I figured, yeah, I'll use them. I just wanted to put them on certain spots of the scatter terrain here, just to break up the monotony and give it a little more. Like I said, everything I put on is just for visual interest and to make them pop a little bit more. Put a couple on here and there. I ran out of the self-adhesive ones, and I do have these ones that aren't quite self-adhesive, so I just put a few, dip them in some PVA, and then put them where I need to go. So, boom, 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 done. Now, as you can see, the floor tile itself has actually been done using methods I had shown earlier. But I wanted to add some more visual interest to this, and I had tried using some of the pigment powder, but I wasn't happy with it, so I'm going to try and actually add some flocking to it. Just pour on some watered down PVA, and then I'm going to be using my earth colored fine flocking, and then I'll be highlighting with a yellow fine flocking, which I use a lot anyway. So, and I figured those two colors would work well with the desert arid terrain, so it would be perfect, and it will just add a little bit of contrast to the sand itself, just to make it pop. Because I also didn't want to put static grass on this, mainly because I want it to be completely flat, so it'll be very highly modular, and I can put the scatter terrain wherever I want on this. And that's why I chose to go with the fine flocking, to give it a little more pop than, like, say, static grass you could get with the static grass. Okay, now I've got to paint some skeleton bits and a bunch of spiders. I've already glued them to some sticks and primered and zenithal highlighted them. And just to get them done quick, because there's a lot of them, I am just going to go with speed paint, Army Painter speed paint, and Vallejo Express colors. It's a quick way to get something done, and a lot of times it's going to look tabletop ready anyway. Tabletop quality. And I'm not really super worried about these skeletons, honestly, because they're mostly going to be covered up and you'll barely be able to see them anyhow. But I still want to at least give them a half-decent effort. Now, the spiders, I was actually looking, down in the basement here, I got spiders, and there was a house spider crawling across my table, and that color just popped to me, so I was like, yeah, I'm going to do that. So I'm just trying to give them what would work for a desert color, and like the browns and the blacks just seem to work really well. So I'm going to paint all the bodies in this tannish brown color, and then I will wind up painting all the legs in darkish, really dark slate gray black color. All in all, it actually wound up working really well, and I was really happy with how it turned out. For cheap Halloween decoration spiders, I mean, literally, the skeletons I got from Dollar General, and the spiders, the bigger spiders, I think I got them from the Dollar Tree, and the smaller spiders are spider confetti from Walmart. So, you don't have to spend a whole lot to get some really cool looking little bits for your terrain. But again, as you can see here, painting all the legs. Actually, I think it is a cultist cloak for the legs. Basically a really dark gray, almost black color. And it works. At least for me, it does. Now that the skeletons are dry, I'm actually finding places that they'll fit and where I think they'll look good. And I'm adding a glob of super glue gel to the back and then putting them in place. And then that's where they'll be. Pretty simple. Now that the glue is dry for the skeletons, I'm actually going to start using some stretched out dryer sheets, link in the description, and then using some watered down PVA, I'm going to glue them in place. And then anywhere that I want webs to be, I'm going to use the same method. I'm stretch them over the skeletons because, again, I want them to look like they were webbed up and basically sucked dry. Again, anywhere that I want webs to be, I'm going to use the same method. Though not all of these pillars or columns will get webs because not every single piece has to be covered with web. And by not doing that also even makes it more modular than before. Now I wanted to add some spider eggs to at least one of these pieces of scatter terrain. So I'm going to be getting out some 5-minute epoxy that I got from the Dollar Tree. Squeeze it into a little cup, and it can be stubborn sometimes. I'm using these little yellow foam balls that I got from the Dollar Tree and dumping a bunch of them in. Added a few drops of some burnt sienna ink into the mix, and then also I'm going to add a dropper, roughly a same amount epoxy to rubbing alcohol or isopropyl alcohol into the mix, and then just stir. This takes a while. It's going to require a lot of stirring to actually get the alcohol and the epoxy thoroughly mixed, so it's like one even product. Did I mention there's a lot of stirring? And I'm just basically kind of like smash them in place with the popsicle stick that I'm using. And then because I put the alcohol in, it'll actually pour and flow much easier into the cracks and crevices. And then add whatever amount looked like the spiders had actually spit it in place. But again, because adding the alcohol will extend the life or the usage of the 5-minute epoxy and make it much more flowable. Okay, now that I've got all the stuff done, it's time to add the final step and glue on the spiders. And this is actually pretty simple. I'm just adding a dab of super glue gel to the bottoms of the spiders and placing them in any place that I think that they would look good. Mainly on webs and pillars that have webs on them, but it's an easy process. And here it is all done and set up. I'm actually really happy with how this turned out. I'm actually going to be, with the way I did it, I'm going to be able to use it for more than just one encounter. the modularity of it will allow for different fights, and being that I made a bunch of the scatter terrain without the webs, I can use them for any like arid desert area. So definitely worth doing all the extra pillar scatter that I did do. It took a lot of extra time, but in the end, it is absolutely worth it. And I'm really happy with it. Even you can see bits of the skulls sticking out from the spiders and whatnot, and I'm really happy with it.
Everybody, if you made it this far, it means you watched to the end, and as always, I really do appreciate that. If you liked the video, hit the thumbs up. If you want to see more, click subscribe. Hit the bell notifications. If you want to leave a comment, that would be helpful too. If you'd like to actually get directly in contact with me, come to the Discord. There on a daily basis, and you can also get updates almost daily on whatever video I happen to be working on. So you'll get sneak peeks of the next video. So come on over, and always remember, guys, when you're making your terrain, the only person you got to worry about is you, because it's your terrain.